Okay, so we are now recording, and just for the purposes of this video, and for those who weren't here for the start of the Monday Open Lab, I'm just going to go over really quick what to expect from this test, what kinds of questions. I'll try to go through it a little more quickly since I went through it on the other video, and then we can get to your guys' questions that you may have about the test or the concepts in the class. So to start out, the time limit for this test is 2 hours and 20 minutes. There are 73 questions on the test, 29 of which are multiple choice and true-false questions. That's the first section of the test, followed by one matching question where it has definitions and terms that you should know, kind of like on exam number 2 with the mission statement and the value statement and things like that, except that these terms will mostly come from chapter 11 when we learned about long-term investments. So make sure you study those terms. It is followed by 28 short answer fill-in-the-blank questions. And then finally, the last section of the test will be 15 problem or document type assignments like what you've seen on the other tests at the end of these tests. So I've written down here what types of problems you can expect to see on the test. I'll just go through those again, and then we can start on any questions you might have. So the first thing you need to know how to do is to create an income statement. And there's a good example of an income statement on page 85 in your textbook. That's chapter 3, and most of the chapter focuses actually on the income statement. Make sure that you understand where certain things go. I noticed on the first test, sometimes there was some confusion about which items belong in expenses, which ones belong in the revenue section, and even some of the non-operating items. So just look at that example and maybe read up on it a little bit again. The next thing, you'll need to be able to determine the cash flow from your income statement. To do that, it's really simple. You'll simply take your net income and you add any non-cash expenses from the income statement. In this class, the only non-cash expense that we deal with is depreciation. And so you simply will add net income plus your depreciation. That will give you your cash flow. The next thing that you need to know how to do is create a balance sheet. It will give you the assets and the liabilities, the shareholders' equity or net assets of the company. And you simply need to know how to place those on the balance sheet. And a good thing to remember is the accounting identity, which is assets equals liabilities plus equity. That is the equation for the balance sheet. If your total assets don't equal your total liabilities and equity, then you've mixed up some numbers somewhere or your math is incorrect in some way. And so go back and look at it. There's a good example of a balance sheet on page 112 in your textbook. That's chapter 4. And that shows you pretty well also how to prepare the balance sheet and where certain items need to be within there. And that's another thing. Make sure you understand current assets, long-term investments, and then net property and equipment. Those are the 3 categories in the assets section. And then you've got your current liabilities and long-term liabilities, and then equity. From your balance sheet, you'll need to be able to find net working capital, which is current assets minus current liabilities. And then your debt ratio also, which is your total liabilities divided by total assets. Debt ratio basically shows you how much of your assets are left after you pay off all your liabilities and things. It can also be defined as how much of each dollar of your assets is financed by debt or liabilities. So continuing on, the next thing you need to know how to do is create a profit and loss statement, which, if you remember, is the total revenues followed by the total variable costs, from which you determine the total contribution margin. You then subtract the fixed costs from the contribution margin, and that will give you your total profit or loss. From that, you'll need to be able to determine break-even for break-even analysis, which is where you determine how many services do you need to offer at this price in order to get a $0 profit. You're not losing any money, you're not making any money. Or it might say, we want you to make $100,000 in this quarter or this period. How many services do I need to sell at this price to make $100,000? And the equation for that is total revenues minus total contribution margin minus fixed costs, and that equals profit. And you can use simple algebra to solve for volume or price, whichever you may be trying to find, or you can plug everything into Excel and do under your data tab, go to what if analysis and goal seek, and it will find it for you. Next, you need to be able to find the required rate of return on stocks. So that's on page 358 in the textbook. The equation is the rate that you're getting, the required rate, equals the risk-free rate plus, open parentheses, the market rate minus the risk-free rate, close parentheses, times beta. And by plugging in those numbers right in Excel or in a calculator, you should easily be able to solve for the rate of return on different stock options. It will give you usually the market return and the risk-free rate, as well as the individual beta for each stock. You simply will determine which might be the best option. Again, that's on page 358 in your textbook. And then finally, you'll need to know how to do bond valuations. So for example, it might say you were issued a 20-year, or let's say you were issued a 10-year bond at 9% coupon rate, and it was a $1,000 bond. And now 3 years have passed, and they're calling the bond, what is the bond worth now? The video in chapter 11, the problem solutions video, the previous guy that recorded those videos did a great job explaining how to solve those problems in Excel, how those formulas work. If you'd like to watch the video, you can review that. If you want to look at one of those problems, maybe we can go over one today as well from the textbook, just to kind of show how that works. And then finally, you'll need to be able to give me a short explanation of something you learned from one of the videos that we watched in the last few weeks. The one with Dwayne Kugelberg and Noah, I think his name is, I can't remember, Owen or Noah. He took you on a tour through the student health center on campus, and then they talked about some of the spreadsheets and tools that they use to manage the finances of the student health center. And that's pretty much everything you ought to know about the test. Some of these questions are taken directly from the first two tests. There is a slightly heavier allotment given to these last few chapters since we haven't covered them before, but not an outrageous one. So you should be pretty set if you studied along the way, and if you studied between chapters, you should be pretty good to go. Now, at this time, do any of you have questions about any concepts or things you might like to go over?
I have a question.
Okay.
Do we get partial credit for the problems if we do part of it right?
Yes, you do. So especially like for the documents, like an income statement, for example, if you've got some of those questions, like the income statement, I think was worth 10 points on the first test. And then there were maybe 15 different items you needed to put in under revenues and expenses and operating income and all these different things, some of which you needed to calculate from your numbers. If you got some of them in the right locations and the right numbers, you got credit for those ones. You got partial credit. But ultimately, you wouldn't get full credit, of course, because mixing those things up skews the numbers and ends up making you have a wrong net income number, for example. So while you don't get full credit, you do get partial credit on problems if, for example, on the income statement, you have some of the items in the right place. The ones where it says find this number and you get the wrong number, you don't get partial credit. Like if it says what is the percent yield or the percent return on a 9% taxable bond, and you put the wrong percentage, then there's no partial credit there. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other questions so far?
Pushed it forward.
I know that on the
between the basket edge,
the video that you made from the previous meeting, you expressed that we needed to be careful about operating expenses on the documents, not putting things that shouldn't be in there, and making sure that we put all the right things into the operating expenses, or operating revenue, I guess, either way. Can you explain what we're looking for to qualify or eliminate particular items in that?
Yes, okay. So operating income is derived from all of the revenues and expenses that are generated from the core activities of the business. So for example, in a hospital's purpose is to provide medical services to a population. So the revenues that I'm going to find are patient services revenue, which are generated by providing procedures and services, x-rays, surgeries, those kinds of things, treatment for patients. Other revenue is also an operating revenue. Other revenue are those things like parking garage fees, cafeteria expenses, maybe a gift shop, something like that, where those things wouldn't exist without the core purpose of providing the service, and they're directly related to that core service. The same with the expenses. Now, there aren't usually non-operating expenses listed. We won't have any for the income statement on this test. But just know that which are expenses, because some people put things like interest, which is an expense, in the revenue section. That's not interest that you're gaining, that's interest you're paying. So again, I'd recommend you review page 85 just to look over which items belong in expenses and which belong in revenue. Now, non-operating income, excuse me, let me finish. So from the revenues, the operating revenues, and the expenses, revenues minus expenses equals your operating income. After that, you then list things like investment income or contributions, donations, things like that. So those are the things in which the hospital made money, but again, they aren't directly related to the core activities of providing health services. So for example, the hospital had some extra cash and we decided to invest in some stocks of another company. And that company decided to pay us some dividends at the end of the period. And so that was income, that was revenue that we received, but it's not related to us providing service. So that's why it's non-operating income. Or maybe we build a new building and we have extra space in the building that we're not using. So we're going to rent that space out to a specialty clinic, like an orthopedics clinic or something like that, a service that we don't offer. And they're paying us rent every single month. And that's revenue that we're getting. But again, it's not related to the services we're providing directly to patients. And that would be non-operating income. Does that answer your question?
Perfect.
Okay, do we have any other questions? You guys feel free to ask any questions you might have. I'll do my very best to answer them.
Could we go over an income statement? I feel like the one that we had on the test was not like what was in the book. So there was a bunch of extra stuff in it that I'm like, what is this? Where does this even go?
Sure. Let me pull up an Excel document here. And I am going to share my screen here. Oh, cool. Okay, can you all see this document here?
Yep.
Okay, so let's say we've got first our revenue section, and we'll have patient services revenue, which will be, let's say, $350,000. Let me make this $sign here. Now this is where some people will get tripped up a little bit. This is where you should enter your provision for bad debt. I know the book taught also to put it in the expenses section, but there's a note in the chapter as well that says that now people are putting it in the revenue section. So here you'll put like $5,000, let's say, and you'll subtract that amount from your patient services revenue. So let's actually call this gross patient services revenue. And then you'll get your net patient services revenue, which is $345,000. Okay. Now we'll have other revenues, which we'll say is $150,000. And then our total revenues is going to be my other revenue plus my net patient services revenue. So I'm at 300. That's not right. I did 3 million here. That's what's going on. So this should equal this minus this. There we go. What am I doing here? Got 1 too many zeros in here. Here we go. Next, you'll have your expenses section. So maybe we'll have, let's say, salaries and wages is usually the biggest one. We're paying our employees to work here. And let's say that we paid them a total of, let's see, salaries and wages.
$205,000.
205,000, perfect. Next, we might have a supplies expense, which we'll say is 15,000. Maybe an insurance expense. Insurance, we're paying insurance on our building and on our equipment, and we're paying liability insurance, of course, so 50,000. Maybe we've got an interest expense that we're paying, which is, let's say, 30,000. We want this one to be 50. And then, of course, we want depreciation for any of our fixed assets, which we'll say is maybe 8,000. And then down here, we'll get our total expenses. Which is just going to be a total of all of these here. Total expenses. So there is where we're going to have our operating income. Okay? Which is going to be our total revenues minus our total expenses. And there's our operating income. Next, we're going to add non-operating income. So let's see, I'll put this one here. Non-operating income. So I'm going to have some investment income. We'll say that we made $4,000 from some investments that we had. And then we're also a not-for-profit, so we got some contributions. we got $1,500. Not a lot, but still, so $1,500 in contributions. And then we'll have, oops, we're going to have our total non-operating income, which is going to equal those two things. Okay. And at this point, we can now find our net income. Our net income is going to be our operating income plus our total non-operating income. And that's our bottom line right there. Okay. Sometimes you might see these moved out a box or two as well for these totals. And that's fine. But that's what your net income or your income statement should look like. And while we're here, why don't we go over a couple of the things you might want to know. So Linda, I'm going to ask you, I went over it at the very beginning of the video, how will you determine the cash flow using your income statement?
So according to my notes, it's net income plus the depreciation.
Perfect. There's my net income. I'm going to add back my depreciation, 8,000. So again, the equation is net income plus non-cash expenses. But in this class, the only non-cash expense we're going to use is depreciation. So that's exactly right, Linda. And that is our cash flow. That's just a rough estimate of the cash flow. To get a more accurate reading, you would look at the statement of cash flows. But that's how you would solve for that if there's a question that asks you what the cash flow is. One other thing you might want to consider is putting a date. So let's say this is the income statement for the period ending December 31st, 2008. Remember, an income statement is over a period of time, where a balance sheet is a snapshot. It's at this moment, I'm going to simply look at what my assets are versus my liabilities. Okay. Do you have any questions about that income statement, Linda, or how to plug in those numbers?
Nope. Thank you for going over it.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have any questions? Any concepts we might need to go over? Any problems you would like to try?
I don't know if you're privy to it, Tyson, but were there any particular concepts over the course of the previous exams that the class as a whole was weak on that we should know to study a little bit more?
That's a good question. Let me think for just a minute. I know for a lot of the class and the other section, actually, it wasn't so much a concept as it was saving time for the problems at the end and making sure to do them correctly. And so just what we've gone over, the income statement, the balance sheet, make sure that you guys can put those together, and you know where to put the numbers. Kind of review, even from the very beginning of the semester, some of the things like the organization of the finance department, the CFO, the comptroller, the treasurer. Who does the CFO report to? That's the CEO. I think there's a question or two on that on this exam. Cost allocation is one where there should be some questions on this test from that. So maybe review the methods of cost allocation, the direct method, the step-down method, and the reciprocal method. Make sure you can tell me what those are, and which one is best, and which one is the easiest. Understand what a cost pool and a cost driver are. And then knowing fixed costs and variable costs. I think one question that tripped people up on one of the previous exams was what kind of cost structure is best for a company that is primarily, or for an industry that is primarily capitated, and which is best for an industry that is primarily fee for service reimbursement. And I can go over that real quick. So for a capitated market or capitated provider, you remember capitation is a per member per month fee that provider is receiving in order to provide health services for the covered population. So they're getting a fixed amount. They don't get any more money for producing more services. In fact, the more services they provide, they're ending up losing money because they're spending more to provide the care, and they're taking it out of the fixed amount that they receive. So in a capitated market, you want to have a cost structure that is mostly fixed costs. And the cost structure just refers to your costs as a company. What are they made up of? Fixed cost or variable cost? And what's the ratio there? So anyway, the fixed cost structure is best for a capitated market because as long as you can keep your fixed costs below the total amount that you're receiving for your per member per month rates, you have a guaranteed profit. Even if you provide a lot more services from month to month, you'll have a guaranteed profit because all your costs are fixed. It's not costing you anymore. In a fee-for-service market, you want to have all or mostly variable costs for a similar reason. Because if you don't have anybody come to see you, you won't have any costs. But if you have a lot of people come to see you, you have more variable costs, but with each visit, there will be costs as well as revenues. And so again, as long as the variable cost is less than the average revenue you're bringing in per visit, you have a guaranteed profit at any volume of service. That was a good question. Besides that, I can't really think of any one or two things that a lot of people struggled on overall. One thing maybe I noticed is, and I don't even know if there's a question for this on the test. I don't remember there being one. Full cost pricing versus marginal pricing. Do you remember what those are? And anybody can answer that, by the way, Corey or Linda or anyone.
Can you refresh our memory?
I sure can. So full cost pricing is a pricing strategy. So we're going to determine how much we're going to charge for a service. And it's a strategy that says we're going to charge a price that is going to recoup all of our costs and cover fixed costs and variable costs and maybe a margin for profit. Marginal cost pricing says we're going to only charge a price that covers the cost of providing the one additional unit of service. So for example, in a radiology department, let's say that I've got fixed costs of $1,000 to run my x-ray machine, and I charge $100 per x-ray. So the first 10 x-rays are going to already cover the fixed costs for me to run my x-ray machine. So then let's say the variable cost after that is only $35 to continue giving x-rays. So after that, I'd only charge $35 per x-ray because that's my marginal cost, that's my marginal pricing. Marginal pricing is a good strategy in a short run because it's competitively cheaper price. It attracts customers, it helps you keep customers, but it's not good in the long run because eventually you're not going to be able to cover all of your costs. You're not going to make enough of a profit to continue operating, and you'll go out of business. Also, it's kind of hard to do marginal cost pricing because there's argument about who gets the price cuts, who gets to pay the cheaper prices for the services, and no one wants to be cut out of getting a better deal. Full cost pricing is a better strategy in the long run because even though you might lose some customers and you might not attract as many new patients, you'll still be able to cover all of your costs and continue to operate and run in the long run. And that would be full cost pricing and marginal cost pricing for you. A rundown version at least.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Anything you'd like to go over, even if you might not have a question about it necessarily, but just want a refresher?
Hey Tyson, what did I miss?
Hi, Sassy. When we went over again what we covered in the first open lab about what to expect in this test, and then we had a few questions about an income statement. We built an income statement together showing where different components go and how to determine your cash flow based on your income statement. Answered some questions about marginal pricing and full cost pricing and a few other things. This video is being recorded and I will upload it for later viewing so you can review anything that you missed thus far. Right now it's open for any questions, so if you have any concept or questions or problems you'd like to go over with the class, we can do that. Just let me know.
I'm at gymnastics, so I just hopped on to watch.
Okay.
Hoping to see some stuff.
Okay. Oh, give me 1 second, you guys.
Is that your cute new wife?
That is my cute new wife. Would you guys like to go over a problem? Would you like to create a profit and loss statement, or maybe we could look at how to determine rate of return on stocks using their risk data, something like that?
Sure,
Yeah.
just do something.
That second one?
The rate of return.
Rate of return, okay. Let me share my screen here. All right, can you guys all see this Excel spreadsheet again?
Yes.
Okay, I created this beforehand just in case. So a problem that you might face, it might say you are looking to invest in some stocks, and these are the options that you have. There's stock A, B, C, and D, which you see over here. And these are their beta, or the riskiness of those stocks. The risk-free rate, let's say is 8%. Make these percents here. And the market rate, let's say, is 15%. So you might have a required rate of return given to you. Here's the equation here. In order to find this, we're simply going to plug this equation in. So we're going to do equals my risk-free rate here plus, and then we're going to open a parentheses, the market rate minus the risk-free rate, close parentheses, times the beta of that particular stock. And what you're going to want to do is put dollar signs in front of these numbers. You can put them in manually, or you can put F4. I think on a Mac you have to hit Command F4 or something like that. That's what I want. F4. And that gives me the percent, the rate that I'm going to get. And now that I've locked those formulas, I can just drag this down and it will use the new beta. So let's say, rate of return. Let's say that the required rate that I'm trying to meet is 17%, okay? I want to invest in something that's going to give me at least a 17% return. So obviously these two options aren't good enough. This one is good, but here's my number one best option, stock D. 19.55, that's 2.5% higher than what I want to get. So I'm definitely going to want to invest in that stock. This equation might be a good one to remember. I know it looks kind of funky, but it's just because these market rate of return and required rate of return equal different. They just have R parentheses RM, but it's just to illustrate what it is. And then you can just change these numbers too. Let's say this one becomes a 1.1, this becomes a 1.24. And the Excel will change it all for you as long as you plug your numbers in correctly. You guys have any questions about that?
I have a question, but I'm not sure if it's really relevant for this class. But why wouldn't you go, if you're looking for 17%, why wouldn't you choose stock D? Because it still gives you this higher than 17%, but it's not as risky as, I'm sorry, stock C. Why wouldn't you pick stock C instead of D? Because D is riskier. It does give you a higher rate of return, but it's also riskier.
That's true, and I think it would really just come down to you and your organization, how your financial health is as an organization. Because as we read in the book about risk aversion, people are generally risk averse. They don't want to take risk if they don't have to. This is the safer option. So it might come down to, is it worth it to you for that extra 2.5%? In the book, you should get a problem that would be more clear to you. It'd probably say, oh, we want at least 18%. So which one should I choose? And it's like, well, clearly you should choose stock fees then.
So you're saying that we should choose the highest one, not necessarily one that gets us to what we want, but is safer.
So in the test, there will only be one answer that will fit.
Okay.
My example, I was just trying to illustrate the math more than anything.
Oh, you're fine. I just was curious.
No, that's a great question. And so I was just saying, it would really just come down to, is that additional higher percent return worth it to you to take the extra risk? And that would be according to you and your business, and can you afford to lose that money if it doesn't pan out, etc. What is your opportunity cost? Is there another option that's a little bit safer and similar return somewhere else?
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. How are you guys feeling? Are there any other concepts that you are worried about? Eric, we haven't heard from you much. Do you have anything you'd like to go over? Okay.
Could we go over a balance sheet?
A balance sheet, sure. If you guys have your books with you, remember I told you that there's a good example of a balance sheet on page 112 in your textbook. The biggest thing to remember is that accounting identity. Assets equals liabilities plus equity. So in our balance sheet, we might have balance sheet on, let's say that we decided to create a balance sheet on December 31st, 2017. And that equation is basically going to be exactly what we just said. So assets, let me put that down over here. Assets equals liabilities plus equity. And that is the key for a balance sheet. So the first section is going to be your assets section. And first we're going to start with current assets. You always list current assets first. Current assets are assets that are cash or cash equivalents or things that can be converted into cash within one accounting period, which is generally a year for most organizations. So we might have first listed our cash and cash equivalents. Let me get some dollars over here real quick. So let's say that my cash and cash equivalents are 45,000. Next, I might have some short-term investments. They're investments, but they're short-term because they're going to come to fruition within the next accounting period, the 1 year. So let's say that those are going to be 25,000. Next, we'll have accounts receivable or net patient accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is things that I've billed for but not yet collected. So I provided services and now there are X amount of patients that owe the hospital money for the services that they received. That's accounts receivable. And let's say that my accounts receivable is 32,000. One to remember that a lot of people seem to mix up is inventories is actually an asset. That is, what do I have in stock? What goods am I trying to sell that I have stored up ready to sell? Those are assets to me. So for those inventories, let's say that I've got $12,000 in inventory. So next, we will total those up. Total current assets. And you're just going to do a sum of those there. 114,000. Next, we'll have any long-term investments listed. So let's say that I've got quite a bit of money invested in long-term investments. I've got I put a lot of my cash in that, so I've got 110,000 invested in long-term investments. Because I don't need it for this moment. We're planning to expand in like 10 years, but until then, I just want this money to make me money. That's my long-term investment. And finally, I'll have net property and equipment. This is things like buildings, land that I own, maybe large trucks or things like that that aren't really part of my main operations, but they're big things, equipment, machinery that are not current assets, but are still assets to my organization. And for those, let's say I've got 95,000. So finally, you're going to total these all up. The total assets. That's going to be my total current assets plus my long-term investments plus my net property and equipment. And there is my total assets, 319,000. So the next section is going to be liabilities and equity. So first again is current liabilities. So those things will be like notes payable, accounts payable, let's say I've got 40,000. So accounts payable is similar to accounts receivable. Accounts receivable is people that owe me money. It's money coming in to me. Accounts payable is I owe people money. I got a service for something that I have not yet paid. So I owe $40,000 that I'm going to need to pay within the next year sometime. That's my accounts payable. Notes payable is for short-term debt that was issued. For example, if I issued bonds and I now need to pay that back or make payments, that's what that is. Notes payable. Those payments that will come within the next accounting period. We might have, there's accrued expenses. I don't know if that is really the one that will be on the test. That's one that's listed here in your textbook. And we'll put accrued expenses at 25,000. And then we'll have our total current liabilities here. And that's going to equal the sum of all my current liabilities. Next, you'll do any long-term debt. I probably will have some. And that will then give me my total liabilities. Which is going to be total current plus long-term debt. And then finally, I'll list my equity or net assets. And this number should fill the gap to get us from here to here. Because remember, assets equals liabilities plus equity. So what we can do here then is maybe we've got 180,000, and then we need to add another 139,000. It looks like in equity. Let me get some dollar signs here. Down here, we'll put total liabilities and equity. And then it will just be my total liabilities plus my equity. And notice that these two numbers match up, and that is what you want to see. Assets equals liabilities plus equity is that same accounting identity. So if we had finished, let's say that I accidentally forgot to list my accrued expenses. I finished my balance sheet and I'm looking at total assets was $319,000, and then my total liabilities and equity is only $294,000. That is an immediate red flag to me that I missed something, or I mixed up a number, or I did my math wrong. And so I can then go back and re-add that into my balance sheet so that it balances. Okay? That is the balance sheet for you. From this, you do need to be able to take a couple of things. First is your net working capital, which is just going to be your current assets minus your current liabilities. So my current assets right there minus my current liabilities right there. There's my net working capital. Next is your debt ratio, which is total liabilities divided by total assets. So we'll take our total liabilities here, divided by our total assets, and 0.56. That means a little bit of over half of every dollar of assets is financed by debt or liabilities. Again, you can find another good example of a balance sheet on page 112 in the textbook. Chapter 4 is all about balance sheets. If you need to review any of those things any further. Do you guys have any questions about the balance sheet or how to create it? Okay. Does that help you out, Linda, a little bit? Awesome. Well, we just have about 5 more minutes for this open lab session. Do you guys have any final questions?
Give us your best tip, best piece of advice.
Best piece of advice. You'll need to review everything that we've studied, but don't worry about studying too in depth because the test is not going to be as hard as you all are afraid it is, probably. I would recommend going over the last couple of chapters about risk and about bonds, especially chapter 11. That is where a lot of the test questions for this last unit will come from, chapter 11.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, well, if you guys don't have any more questions, I think we will wrap this up. I'll get this video uploaded to iLearn and probably onto YouTube again as well, since that seems to be working better for getting that video playing. You guys can review these videos. If you have any questions, you can send me or Brother Wolf an email. And otherwise, good luck studying for the exam. Hope you guys all do really well.
Thanks, Tyson.
You're welcome. You guys have a nice night.